Hey everyone, I'm Johnny, and today we're taking a look at three war movies from the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic has had an interesting and complicated history throughout the 20th century and was only formed in 1993. Of course, before then it was known as Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia's history has been defined by war. It was formed at the end of World War I, annexed by Germany in World War II, and annexed again by the Soviet Union at the start of the Cold War. So here are three movies that help tell the tale of the underdog that is Czechoslovakia. Before we get into our list, which will be all modern Czech movies released in the last 20 years, I'll quickly highlight some noteworthy additions and classics I don't want to be overlooked. There's Sikel Has to Die from 1998, a well-told story of how World War II can reach and affect rural life. There's Signum Latis, set before Czechoslovakia was formed as a nation, set during the First World War when it was part of Austria-Hungary. Then there is a whole slew of Soviet-style propaganda films such as Tank Brigade from 1955, which had a notable use of an incredible number of authentic World War II Soviet and German tanks. There is also a significant number of movies covering the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, an SS officer and one of the architects of the Holocaust, who was assassinated by Czechoslovakian SOE agents. The modern tellings are Anthropoid, The Man with the Iron Heart, and Operation Daybreak from 1975. Notable Czech productions on the same subject are The Assassination from 1965 and Litus, which highlights the massacre of the Czech town of Litus in reprisal for the assassination of Heydrich. But now on to today's three recommendations. Dark Blue World from 2001. This is my personal favorite on the list. If you have an interest in the Battle of Britain and Czech history, this would be a good movie for you, as it follows the Czech contribution to the war in the air over Britain and France, featuring many excellent Spitfire scenes.
Morgen, meine Herren Offiziere. Ich bin Oberleutnant Hesse. Bin beauftragt, das Kommando über den Flugplatz zu übernehmen.
When Hitler annexed and occupied Czechoslovakia, one of the first things the army did was take over the airfields. However, many loyal Czechoslovak pilots fled to France to keep fighting for the Allied cause. Of course, the rapid fall of France meant they had to flee a second time, but this time to Britain. Just under 90 Czechoslovak pilots flew in the Battle of Britain. Though the majority would fly Hurricanes, some flew Spitfires. When the Czechs came to fight for Britain, they came with experience, and many would become aces. Dark Blue World stands out for several reasons. Firstly, the flight choreography is excellent. Dark Blue World at the time of filming was the most expensive Czech film ever produced. The production team rented Spitfires at the cost of $10,000 per flight hour, producing some incredible low-level flying. The movie also blends in footage from the Battle of Britain, the movie from 1969, and Memphis Belle from 1990, in a tremendous dedication to real effects over CGI use. The film also gets credit for transitioning through time from the Battle of Britain to a communist labor camp, highlighting how these pilots not only left home to continue fighting, but once they returned after the war, they were punished by their now Soviet-shaped government, who treated all pro-West soldiers with disdain. The movie has some love interest and personal stories which are well done, and they do not distract from the tribute this movie is to the Czech pilots who fought with Britain.
Are you maintaining your speed?
Yes, sir. Šlapeme jako idioti.
Hoši, to je kravina, já už nemůžu.
Byli vítězně němečtí studenti a Češi jim jako pomstu za ty zabrané Sudety strhávali z nohou bílé punčochy.
I Serve the King of England from 2006. So it might be a bit of a stretch adding this to the list and calling it a war movie. It's more a lighthearted story of personal development and ambition, but it does take place in Prague during Nazi occupation. It's a very stylish and whimsical film. It might not be for everyone, but it captures some very unique perspectives of occupation.
Praha je krásné říšské město. A právo po něm chodit je nezadatelné právo každého Němce.
I Serve the King of England is unique. in that it offers the viewpoint of a naive, politically neutral man who lives through the German occupation and later in the movie the subsequent Soviet domination of Czechoslovakia. Now understand this movie is a whimsical story of life and not a war movie, but it's truly a beautiful film. It follows a Czech waiter who falls in love with several women before ultimately settling down with an ethnic German living in Prague. Ultimately they marry, despite her extreme yet casual Nazi beliefs, which is actually a refreshing telling of Nazi ideology, in that seemingly good, naive, and regular people did follow these beliefs, and it wasn't confined to the typical evildoers and stereotypes shown in other films. The film whimsically covers several very unique aspects of Nazism, including our waiter briefly working at a Nazi breeding program called a hotel, and though you follow primarily our waiter throughout his career, the events of his life consistently collide with the events of the war. The breeding program hotel, for example, becomes a hospital for the wounded from the Eastern Front. The movie is filled with many instances of beauty and irony that intertwine politically with the nation's history, watching the transformation of the nation from what was a progressive and well-to-do country to both a Nazi-occupied and Soviet-corrupted state through the eyes of a very charming, simple waiter is about as happy a way to tell a war story without being disrespectful, and I Serve the King of England pulls it off. Alright, Tobruk from 2008. This is our third and final recommendation on the list. Tobruk, of course, always associated with the British as a key stronghold in North Africa. It's also where one of the most significant sieges of World War II took place. But like the Battle of Britain, this is again one of the many battles where the Czechs fought alongside the Allies while their nation stood occupied by Germany. Let me just start by saying this movie has little in common with the 1967 film by the same name, which is more of a commando action sort of film. The Czech story of Tobruk is a far more sober tale of the trial that was the siege of Tobruk. In 1941, Tobruk would hold off a siege for 241 days against Axis forces. The port city in Libya would be cut off from British ground forces as the Allies retreated to the Egyptian border. Holding the port would deprive the Axis of its use in their attempt to press the British in Egypt. The port was held by British, Australian, New Zealand, Indian, Polish, and of course Czechoslovak forces. These forces would continue to repulse Axis attacks and fight through horrific shelling and bombing raids. The film follows Czechoslovakian volunteers who arrive as fresh recruits to the port city. You'll certainly experience your typical tropes, such as the tough training and some booze-filled camaraderie, etc. But that quickly slips away after the first half hour of the film, as the director knows we've seen it a million times in Hollywood. The strength of this film comes from the dust, sand, sweat, fear, and the waiting that comes with the protracted siege. These war movies out of Europe will never match the big budget battles of Hollywood. So by keeping such scenes small, the director can instead focus on the acting and mental battle that comes from siege warfare. The movie highlights that sometimes it's just the heat and the flies that can break a soldier. Alright, I'm Johnny, and I hope I've exposed a few people to some new movies. If you want to add to the list in the comments section below, that's greatly appreciated, and we'll see you in the next video.